Alright, let's continue with Maya Lab 6. This should be video part 5. Okay, we just finished creating our diffuse map for our eyeball, and I want to show you guys how to export this really quick. So we're going to go to File, Export, and let's choose Export As. And actually, real quick, I think I'm going to change my paint color to this kind of darker outside paint color instead. I think that'll show up better on my image. So let me remind you guys how to change that real quick. You use the eyedropper tool, and I'm actually going to grab like really close to the edge here, this darker pink color. Come back down and use my paint bucket tool, and I'll dump that in. Okay, I think that's just going to blend more seamlessly with my eyeball. And so that should work out better for me. Actually, the best color to grab would be the one that lines up with my edges of my UVs. So let's take a look at where my eyeball image lines up. Okay, so it's like right here near this edge. So I'm actually going to pull the color from like right about there. Let's do that instead. So I'm going to increase my opacity. And let's use that eyedropper tool again. And I'm just going to grab this kind of pink color right there. Okay, perfect. And that's the one I want to dump into here. So again, right click, paint bucket tool, and then I'll dump that in. Okay, that should work well. Alright, and then now I want to go ahead and export this image file. So let's go to File, Export, Export As, and I'm going to choose JPEG, high quality. Okay, that looks good, and then I'll just hit export, and I want to save this to my H drive again. So H drive, sphere diffuse, yep, JPEG, that works, and I just want to put it in my 3D graphics folder, and then Autodesk projects, and this time I want it in my materials folder. And remember how we had our eyeball diffuse image before? So this is going to be our sphere diffuse. You can also call this eye diffuse, something like that, but I'm just going to call it sphere diffuse so that I can tell the difference between the two. So sphere diffuse, that looks good, and then I'll just hit save. Alright, now before I bring this into Maya, I also am going to export the specularity map as well. Okay, so the specularity map, that is the gloss map. That tells Maya how glossy you want to make your object. Because this is an eyeball, we want it to be fairly glossy, but generally the lighter portions of color is where we're going to get more of the gloss element. So in order to create an easy specular map, we can just add an adjustment layer and make this black and white. So specularity maps, they can only read white and black information, so white, gray, black, that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I am going to do a black and white adjustment layer. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And now I am going to edit this a little bit. So I could just take it as is. What's going to happen is that this area that's black is not going to be very shiny at all. And then the rest of the areas will be. Because it's an eyeball, I actually do want more gloss than normal. So I am going to go ahead and just like adjust everything up a tiny bit. Okay, so I'll come in with my reds, I'll pull those up a little, yellows, greens, blues as well, and then magentas, right? And so now it's kind of washed out my image a little bit. That's totally fine. But I just wanted to kind of gloss that up a little bit more. So that looks good. Now I'm going to export this as my specularity map. So File, Export, Export As, JPEG, high quality, right? Export. And this time, instead of sphere diffuse, I'm going to call it sphere spec, or sphere specularity, right? Something like that. Specular spec. I like sphere spec, so I'll stick with that and hit save. Alrighty. And then I can show you guys how to make more maps later, and we'll get into different texture maps later down the road. But for our eyeball, a diffuse map and a specularity map, that's perfect. That'll work out great. So now we're going to go back into Maya. You can go ahead and save your Photoshop file again. Actually, real quick, just hit save so that you have both of those maps in there. Let's go back to Maya and let's apply these maps, yeah? Let's come back in and add that diffuse map, our diffuse texture map, to our sphere. So we're going to go right click menu, assign a new material, and we need to add in a Blinn or a Phong material. We could also add in standard surface, that works as well. And we'll be using standard surface. This is a material you'll use a lot more later. If you decide to pursue 3D graphics as a clear, standard surface just gives you a lot more options down the line. But for our purposes, it's okay to use a Blinn, a Lambert, or a Phong. I'm going to use Blinn because we want to add a specularity map as well. So choose Blinn, and then we're going to come in here and let's name this eyeball. Okay, awesome. So now we have our eyeball map, and we're going to add our diffuse, right, which is our color information texture. So we're going to click on the little checkers there, click File. So now we're adding a file. We can call this file eyeball diffuse. All right, and it's just good practice to name your files, name your textures, that way you can find them later. And then let's go ahead and grab our image file. So go to My Computer, H Drive, 3D Graphics, Autodesk, Projects, and then this should be in your materials folder that you created. We're going to go ahead and grab our sphere diffuse file, so hit open. Okay, and automatically we can see this applied. If for you right now you can only see it like this, maybe that means you're in the shaded view and you're not in the actual texture view. So to apply the texture, hit hotkey 5, or hotkey 6, sorry, hotkey 6, and then you'll be able to actually see that eye texture. All right, and then you can notice that the iris is pretty large here. So you could consider scaling down that image file so that the iris is a little bit smaller. In the future, maybe you would want to start with doing that. But we're kind of going for like a Halloween-y, cartoony eyeball look here. So we'll just leave it as is. And then the next thing I want to do is change this from the regular display mode here to a smooth view. So hotkey 3 will smooth this circle, or the sphere out, so now it looks like nice and smooth. Alright, and then you can see your seam right here. This is the portion of your UV map. If we open that again, Windows, Modeling Editor, UV Editor. Let's click on our sphere. So this is going to be the portion of your UV map that connects those two areas. So if I go ahead and click on this image to show that preview, because all of this back piece is just that pink color, it doesn't blend super seamlessly over here, right? And you can especially notice it right there. So maybe this is something that if you wanted to be able to see your eyeball 360 instead of just have it in a socket, you would want to come back into Photoshop and add some of that veiny texture, right, into this area of your map, right? Add some of those veins in so that it blends a little more seamlessly. But for our purposes, this totally works, and it's pretty subtle, the difference between those two. Alright, so and that's just how that image appears on your UV map. And because we exported the snapshot, it came in perfectly lined up the way we want it to. So that is super nice. Now we're going to add that specular map that I talked about. So the Blinn is already pretty glossy, which is nice, so you can kind of see that gloss right now as I'm moving around the eye. But let's add our specific specular gloss map. So I'm going to click on this material attributes, and we're going to edit our eyeball material a little bit more. So let's add this specular color map. So right now you can adjust just like the specularity, which is how glossy or shiny our eyeball is right here. But I want to just add a specular map so that we can use that gray scale, that black and white map that we created, and it'll add specularity where we want it to. So let's click on this little checker box, add a file. This one we're going to call eyeball spec, right? That's our specular map. And let's go ahead and grab our image file in our materials folder again, right? Sphere spec, hit open. Alrighty. Okay, that looks good. And that kind of changed a little bit of the gloss factor. It toned things down in certain areas, but left it pretty shiny in other areas. All right, and that specularity map is something that you'll be able to tell makes a big difference on other objects more because we already used a blend texture. The difference wasn't huge, but we can also reduce our reflectivity here if we want to change the amount of like metal reflectivity that we have going on. And feel free to like play with some of these other attributes, yeah. All right, and then specular roll-off, you can change how glossy it appears with that as well. All right, so that looks pretty good. Nice. Okay, and that is how you can create a UV map and apply this eyeball texture, yeah? So looks nice. And maybe it'd be better to line this up slightly better so that our iris doesn't look like it is a little wonky right there. So you can always go back into Photoshop, change things around. Maybe it's just our image file itself, or you can come in and paint on top of it with some black if that bothers you. But yeah, that's how to apply that map. All right, and then next we're going to be moving on to unwrapping more complex objects. So if you guys had extra time during lab, you should have unwrapped and added the Coca-Cola can to this cylinder. That's kind of the challenge mode. But other than that, you should have Minecraft cube, eyeball, and your Coca-Cola can texture applied. Go ahead and let's save this file, save scene as. Let's call this one MayaLab 6, right? MayaLab 6. And save.